This is the story of a woman who returned from death with a terrifying message from Jesus, told by the woman herself. Keep watching till the end to discover what happened to her. Let's begin. Hello, my name is Margaret Bennett, and I never imagined I'd return from death at the age of 70. I suppose no one does. But here I am, alive, breathing, speaking to you when I should have passed into eternity. You see, I wasn't just gone for a moment. I was gone long enough for the doctors to give up, for my family to weep over me, and for the finality of death to settle in. And yet, I came back. But it wasn't because I wanted to. No, I was sent back. Sent back with a message so urgent, so terrifying, that I can't keep silent about it. The last thing I remember before waking up was the feeling of my body giving out. The illness had hit me fast, something the doctors struggled to name. My daughter Susan had rushed me to the hospital, her hand shaking as she clutched mine in the ambulance. "Hang on, Mom," she kept saying, her voice cracking. My grandson Ethan trailed close behind in his old, beat-up car, honking at traffic to keep up. I remember feeling their love, their worry, but also the slow, inevitable pull of something much bigger. When I opened my eyes again, it wasn't to the world I'd known for 7 decades. There was light, blinding, warm, and endless. It wasn't like the light from the sun. This light was alive. It embraced me, filling me with a peace I can't describe. And then I stood in the presence of him, Jesus. I know how that sounds. I know you're probably thinking, this old lady has finally lost it. But I swear to you, I saw him. I was there. His eyes, they saw everything. His voice, it wasn't just heard. It was felt, resonating deep inside me. He showed me things I didn't want to see, things about our world and where we're headed. And then, just as quickly as I'd arrived, I was sent back. When I woke up, I was back in that hospital bed. My daughter Susan was gripping my hand, tears running down her face. Her head was bowed, and her eyes were closed. I heard her whisper, "Goodbye, Mom." Ethan stood behind her, his arms crossed, his face pale. My other grandson, Caleb, was staring out the window, avoiding the scene altogether. The nurses were speaking in low tones, one of them switching off the monitors. They had declared me dead. Then I gasped, drawing an air so sharply that Susan screamed. I don't blame her. It must have been terrifying. Her head snapped up, and she stumbled backward, her chair screeching across the floor. Ethan jumped back, bumping into a tray of instruments, and Caleb spun around, his face white as a sheet. "Mom," Susan stammered, her voice trembling as she clutched the edge of my bed. I tried to smile, but it must have come out more like a grimace. My body still felt heavy, sluggish, but I forced the words out. "I'm back," I whispered, my throat dry and rasping. The nurses were shouting now, calling for the doctor. One of them dropped her clipboard, and the sound of it hitting the floor echoed in the room like a thunderclap. The attending physician, Dr. Reynolds, burst through the door moments later, his face a mix of disbelief and shock. "That's not possible," he muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning the machines, my body, and then my face. "This is impossible." But impossible or not, I was there. I was alive. Susan's face was a mixture of joy and fear. "What? How? Mom, you were gone. You were gone." "I know," I said, my voice stronger now. "But I've been sent back. There's something I have to tell you." Her expression shifted. "Sent back? What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath and looked into her eyes. "I saw him, Susan. I saw Jesus. And he sent me back with a message. It's not just for me. It's for the whole world. And it's about Elon Musk." Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Behind her, Ethan furrowed his brow, his skepticism already evident. Elon Musk? He repeated, as if I just said something absurd. Yes, I said, my voice firm. He showed me things, Ethan. Things about the future, about humanity's choices. And Elon Musk, he's at the center of it all. Caleb shifted uncomfortably by the window, rubbing the back of his neck. Susan blinked rapidly, trying to process what I was saying. The room fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the distant beeping of a machine somewhere in the hallway. I could see the disbelief on their faces, the mixture of hope, confusion, and doubt. But there was no denying what I had experienced. I don't expect you to understand, I said, my voice softer now. But you need to listen. This message isn't about me. It's about all of us. Jesus showed me what's coming, and Elon Musk is at a crossroad. The choices he makes will affect the future of all mankind. Susan finally found her voice. Mom, you've just been through so much. Maybe this is... I know what you're thinking, I interrupted. That it's a dream or a hallucination. But I'm telling you, this is real. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The doctor tried to interject, but I didn't let him. Please, I said, my eyes pleading. Just listen. This isn't about whether or not you believe me. It's about what's coming. We have to be ready. And as I looked at each of them, Susan, Ethan, Caleb, the nurses, even the skeptical doctor, I saw the weight of my words beginning to sink in. Whether they believed me or not, they couldn't deny that something extraordinary had happened. And this was only the beginning. I remember every detail of what happened after I died. It wasn't like falling asleep or fading away into darkness. One moment, I felt my body letting go, the weight of years and sickness pulling me down like an anchor. The next, I was light as a feather, soaring upward into a place that was unlike anything I could have imagined. At first, it was quiet, almost eerily so. But the quiet wasn't empty. It was full, brimming with an energy I couldn't describe. There was light everywhere, bright and golden, yet not blinding. It wrapped around me, warm and comforting, as though it knew me. It wasn't the sterile, artificial light of the hospital, or even the warm glow of a sunrise. This light was alive. It pulsed with something pure, something holy. And as it touched me, I felt all the pain, fear, and heaviness of my life melt away. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even confused. I just was. And it was perfect. As I moved, or was pulled, I'm not sure which, I began to see shapes forming in the distance. The light grew brighter, more vivid, and soon I realized it wasn't just light. It was a place. Rolling hills, golden fields, rivers that shimmered like liquid crystal. Everything seemed to hum with a kind of music, but not music as we know it. It wasn't coming from a source. It was simply there, as if the whole place was alive and singing. Colors I had never seen before swirled around me, vibrant and impossible to describe. Creeping in, greed, corruption, and a dangerous reliance on things they didn't control spread through the visions I saw. Then, one name stood out among the chaos: Elon Musk. I saw him clearly, standing at the center of it all. He was surrounded by towering structures of glass and steel, machines that seemed alive, and pathways that led to the stars. He was both a builder and a destroyer, a man of immense power and influence. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, I saw figures, some whispering encouragement, others sowing doubt. It was as if he were walking a tightrope, teetering between two fates, one of creation and one of destruction. Jesus' voice came again, steady and sorrowful. He is at a crossroads. The choices he makes will shape not just this world but worlds to come. I didn't understand at first. Why Elon Musk? Why was this one man so important? But Jesus showed me more. I saw the technologies Musk was creating, spaceships hurtling toward distant planets, machines that could think and feel, wires connecting human minds to computers. These weren't just inventions. They were tools that could either elevate humanity to something greater or sever it from its soul. Pray for him, Jesus said. Pray for the choices he will make, for the enemy seeks to use his brilliance against him. I felt the weight of those words settle on me like a heavy cloak. I wanted to ask questions, to plead for more time to understand, but I couldn't speak. The visions kept coming. I saw the earth again, but this time it was different. In one version, it was vibrant, alive, a place where technology and faith worked together to bring harmony. In another, it was cold and lifeless, a world dominated by machines and stripped of its humanity. The contrast was stark, and the message was clear. The future was hanging in the balance. Margaret, Jesus said again, his voice gentle but firm. You must go back and tell them. Tell them what you have seen. Tell them to pray, to guide, and to hope. This path is not set in stone. There is still time. Before I could protest, before I could even think to ask, why me? The light began to fade. The music, the colors, the warmth, all of it started slipping away. I felt myself being pulled back down, away from the perfection of that place. And then, I was in darkness again. The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air, my daughter screaming, and the world crashing back around me. But even as I returned to the confines of my old, frail body, the message burned within me. It was as if it had been etched onto my soul, and I knew I had to share it, no matter how impossible it sounded. Jesus had sent me back, and I couldn't ignore what he had shown me. The future depended on it. The hospital room was still buzzing with confusion and disbelief as I began to explain what had happened. My daughter Susan was sitting beside me, her hand on mine, while Ethan and Caleb stood nearby, their faces pale and drawn. Dr. Reynolds had taken a step back, his arms crossed, skepticism clear in his expression. The nurses whispered to one another in the corner, unsure whether to stay or leave. But I didn't have time for their doubts or questions. What I had seen, what I had been told, was too important to let their disbelief deter me. I know this is hard to understand, I began, my voice trembling but steady. I know how impossible it sounds, but I'm telling you, I saw Jesus. I stood before him, and he showed me things I can't unsee. He gave me a message, one that the world needs to hear. Susan tried to smile, but it was weak, her confusion showing in the tight lines around her mouth. Mom, you've been through a lot, she said gently, as if trying to calm me. Maybe this is just your mind trying to make sense of. It's not my mind, Susan. I interrupted, squeezing her hand. I'm not confused, and I'm not crazy. This is real. He spoke to me, and he told me to come back for a reason. Ethan let out a small, nervous laugh and rubbed the back of his neck. Grandma, you're saying you saw Jesus? And what? He sent you back with a message. For us? For the world? That's... He stopped himself, his skepticism evident. That's a lot to take in. I looked directly at him, my gaze steady. I know you don't believe me, Ethan. But you will. You have to listen. This isn't about me. It's about all of us. Jesus showed me what's coming, and it's bigger than anything you can imagine. Caleb, who had been silent until now, shifted uncomfortably in his spot by the window. You said something about Elon Musk, he said quietly, his voice hesitant. Why would Jesus talk about him? He's just a guy who builds rockets and electric cars, right? He's not just a guy, I said firmly. He's a man at the center of something much bigger than himself. Jesus showed me a future where his decisions, his work, shape the destiny of humanity. He has the power to create or destroy, to lead us towards salvation or ruin. And right now, he's standing at a crossroads. The room went silent. Even Dr. Reynolds, who had been quietly checking my vitals, paused to listen. I could feel the weight of their attention, the mixture of disbelief and intrigue that hung in the air. It didn't matter if they believed me in that moment. What mattered was that they heard me. Jesus showed me a vision, I continued. He showed me the earth, the way it is now, and the way it could be. He showed me humanity's progress, our technology, our achievements, but also the dangers we've created for ourselves. Elon Musk was at the center of it all. His work with artificial intelligence, space exploration, and neural technology. These are tools that could either save us or destroy us. And the choices he makes in the coming years will determine which path we take. Susan frowned, her brow furrowing deeply. Mom, why Elon Musk? Why him, of all people? He's just one man. That's exactly why, I said. Because he's not just one man anymore. He's become a symbol of our future, a leader in fields that are reshaping the world. Jesus said he's standing on a precipice, and what he does next will ripple through all of humanity. But he's not infallible. He's human, just like the rest of us, and he needs guidance. He needs prayers. Ethan shook his head, clearly struggling to process my words. I mean, I get it. He's important, sure. But what does praying for him do? He's a scientist, not some kind of prophet or savior. That's where you're wrong, I said, leaning forward as much as my frail body would allow. He doesn't have to be a prophet or a savior to have the power to change the world. The enemy, yes, the enemy, is watching him closely, trying to twist his brilliance into something dark, something that will sever us from God and each other. Jesus told me this. Elon Musk is brilliant, but he's also vulnerable. He needs our prayers to stay on the right path, to use his gifts for good. Dr. Reynolds, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Mrs. Bennett, he said cautiously, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but you've just been through an extraordinary experience. It's not uncommon for people who've had near-death experiences of that cold, lifeless world burning in my mind. It was empty, soulless. Machines had taken over everything, and humanity had become a shadow of itself. There was no love, no faith, no connection, just cold efficiency and loneliness. Caleb shuddered visibly. And you think Elon Musk has the power to decide between those futures? I know he does, I said, and so do we. Our prayers, our choices, they matter. Jesus showed me that this isn't set in stone. We still have time, but we have to act now. The weight of my words hung in the air, pressing down on all of us. I could see the doubt in their eyes, but I could also see something else, a spark of belief. However faint, it was enough. It had to be enough. The days following my return were a whirlwind of emotions, confusion, and a strange kind of energy that seemed to ripple outward from the moment I woke. Word spread quickly in the small town where I lived, and soon my survival and the story of what I had experienced became the talk of the community. At first, it was just whispers in the hospital halls, the nurses and doctors exchanging glances and quiet conversations. Then, as I was discharged and sent home, it seemed like the entire world had shifted in a way I couldn't quite explain. Susan stayed with me, refusing to leave my side. She claimed it was to help me recover, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She watched me closely, as though waiting for me to slip back into the realm I had so briefly left. Ethan and Caleb came by often, their curiosity outweighing their skepticism. They'd sit in my living room, asking questions that ranged from hesitant to outright challenging. Grandma, Ethan asked one evening, leaning forward in his chair, if what you saw is real, then why you? Why would Jesus choose you to deliver a message about someone like Elon Musk? I smiled faintly, folding my hands in my lap. Because I'm not anyone special, I said. That's the point. This message isn't about me. It's about all of us. Jesus doesn't choose based on status or power. He chooses based on faith, on willingness. And maybe I was the only one who would listen. Caleb frowned, sitting on the arm of the couch. But why talk about Musk specifically? There are so many powerful people in the world, politicians, leaders, billionaires. Why him? Because his work is different, I said firmly. What Jesus showed me wasn't about politics or money. It was about the tools Musk is creating. Tools that could either save us or destroy us. Artificial intelligence, space exploration, neural technologies. These are things that could shape the future in ways we don't fully understand yet. And Jesus said he's at a crossroads. He's making decisions right now that will ripple through the fabric of existence. Susan, sitting quietly in the corner with her arms crossed, finally spoke. Mom, I want to believe you. I really do. But how are we supposed to know if any of this is real? What if it's just... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I didn't blame her for doubting. Even I struggled to grasp the enormity of what had happened. But then something strange began to happen. The first sign came the day after I returned home. I was sitting in my kitchen, sipping a cup of tea, when the lights flickered. It wasn't unusual. Our town's electrical grid wasn't exactly state-of-the-art. But this felt different. The flickering wasn't random. It came in a steady rhythm, almost like a pulse. I stood up, feeling a strange tingle run through me. As I walked toward the window, I saw a small bird sitting on the windowsill, staring at me with unblinking eyes. Its presence was unnerving, but before I could react, it let out a sharp chirp and flew away, disappearing into the sky. It might have been nothing, I told myself, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The next sign was harder to dismiss. Susan and I were in the living room when the television, which had been off, suddenly turned on by itself. The screen was filled with static, but beneath the crackling noise, a faint voice could be heard. It was garbled, almost like a radio transmission from far away, but it was enough to make Susan jump to her feet. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The voice was saying something I couldn't quite make out, but the tone was urgent, insistent. Then, as quickly as it had started, the television turned off again, plunging the room into silence. Susan looked at me, her face pale. "Mom, what's happening?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think it's connected to the message." As the days went on, the signs became more frequent. Lights would flicker in patterns that felt deliberate. Unexplained sounds echoed through the house at odd hours. Footsteps, whispers, the hum of machinery that didn't exist. Even the weather seemed to change abruptly around me, storms appearing and disappearing without warning. The strangest part was the dreams. Every night, I dreamed of the visions Jesus had shown me. Elon Musk standing at the crossroads, the two futures diverging before him, and the shadowy figures watching him from the edges. Ethan was the first to notice the pattern. "Grandma," he said one afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook in hand, "these things keep happening when you talk about the message. Have you noticed that? It's like something doesn't want you to tell people." I nodded slowly. I felt it too. There's something, or someone, trying to interfere. Susan looked skeptical but didn't argue. She had seen enough to know that something was happening, even if she didn't fully believe my story. "So what do we do?" she asked. "How do we stop it?" "We can't stop it," I said, "but we can keep going. The message has to get out, no matter what." As word of my experience spread, more people began to visit. Neighbors, church members, even strangers from other towns showed up at my door, curious to hear my story. Some came with open hearts, eager to listen. Others came with skepticism, ready to dismiss me as an old woman clinging to a delusion. But no matter their reaction, I told them the same thing. The future is not set in stone, and our prayers, our choices, and our actions matter more than ever. Not everyone believed me, of course, Some people laughed in my face. Others whispered behind my back, calling me crazy or attention-seeking. But there were also those who listened, really listened, and those were the people who gave me hope. One day, a reporter from the local news showed up at my door. His name was Mark, and he was young, sharp, and skeptical. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, holding a notebook and a recorder, "I've heard some interesting things about you. Do you mind if I ask a few questions?" I invited him in, knowing that this was part of the mission. He asked about my experience, about the visions, and about the message Jesus had given me. At first, his questions were dismissive, almost mocking. But as I spoke, his demeanor changed. By the time I finished, he was quiet, his pen resting on the page. "You really believe this, don't you?" he asked softly. "I don't just believe it," I said. "I know it. And deep down you know it too." Mark left that day with more questions than answers, but I could tell I had planted a seed. And that was all I knew I needed. The strange occurrences continued, but they didn't scare me anymore. If anything, they only strengthened my resolve. The message was bigger than me, bigger than my fear, and I was determined to see it through. As the days turned into weeks, my resolve to share the message grew stronger, even as the challenges seemed to multiply. The strange occurrences didn't stop. If anything, they intensified. Lights flickered more often. Electronics malfunctioned without explanation. And the whispers in the silence of the night became louder, as if something unseen was watching, waiting. It wasn't just in my home anymore. Neighbors began reporting odd happenings too. Unexplained power surges, strange feelings of unease, and even vivid dreams they couldn't explain. Despite the growing unease, I knew I couldn't let fear stop me. The visions I had seen, and the message Jesus had entrusted to me were too important. It wasn't about convincing everyone or gaining followers. It was about planting seeds, igniting conversations, and reminding people of the power they held to shape the future. But the weight of it all was heavy, and I often found myself turning to prayer for strength. One morning, as I sat by the window watching the sunlight dance through the trees, Susan joined me. She had been quieter than usual lately, her skepticism tempered by the strange events she could no longer deny. She brought me a cup of tea and sat down. I have no reason to lie, no motive beyond sharing what I've seen. Maybe that's why Jesus chose me. Susan nodded slowly, her brow furrowed. "I want to believe you," she said softly. "I really do. But it's just so much to take in. Elon Musk, technology shaping the future. It feels so big." "It is big," I said gently. "But that's why it's so important. The world is changing faster than we can comprehend, and we're at a turning point. We need to remember what matters, what grounds us. And Elon Musk, he's at the heart of this shift. He's not a savior, Susan, but he's a man with incredible influence. What he chooses to do with that influence will ripple through the world." As we spoke, Ethan and Caleb arrived, their expressions more serious than usual. "Grandma," Ethan said, sitting down across from me. "We've been talking and, well, we want to help." I raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Help how?" Caleb leaned forward, his voice steady. "By getting your message out. We've been looking online, researching what Musk is doing, his projects, his interviews, everything. People are already asking questions about the future of technology and how ITLL affect humanity. If we share your story, maybe ITLL make people think." My heart swelled with pride and gratitude. "That means more to me than you know," I said. "But you need to be careful. Not everyone will understand. Some people will mock you, call you crazy, just like they've done to me." "We're ready for that," Ethan said firmly. "This is too important to stay silent." And so, with their help, my story began to spread. It started small. Ethan and Caleb shared my account on social media, writing about my experience with honesty and passion. At first, the responses were mixed. Some people were inspired, sharing the posts with comments about faith, hope, and the future. Others were dismissive, calling it a hoax or a desperate plea for attention. But as more people read the story, the conversation began to shift. Local news outlets picked up the story, interviewing me in my modest living room. Mark, the young reporter who had visited weeks earlier, returned with a camera crew, asking more in-depth questions. "Mrs. Bennett," he said during the interview, "what do you hope to achieve by sharing this message?" "I'm not trying to achieve anything," I said simply. "This isn't about fame or recognition. It's about reminding people of what matters. We're standing at a crossroads, Mark. The choices we make now, about technology, about humanity, about faith, will shape the future in ways we can't fully understand. My job is to share what I've seen. The rest is up to them." The interview aired that evening, and the response was overwhelming. People from all over the country, and even the world, began reaching out, sharing their thoughts, their prayers, and their own experiences. Some claimed they had also seen visions, felt a pull towards something greater. Others wrote to say that my story had made them think differently about technology and its role in their lives. Still, there were skeptics, and their voices were loud. But I didn't let them deter me. This wasn't about convincing everyone. It was about starting a conversation. As the message spread, the strange occurrences around me grew more intense. One night, I awoke to find my room bathed in an eerie glow, though no light source could be found. The whispers, which had once been faint, were now distinct. Though I couldn't make out the words, it felt as though something was pushing back against the message, trying to stop it from reaching the people who needed to hear it. But the more resistance I faced, the more determined I became. I knew this wasn't just a test for Elon Musk or the world. It was a test for me, for my faith, for my courage. And I wasn't going to fail. One day, as I sat on my porch, a letter arrived. It was from a young woman named Maria, who lived halfway across the country. In her letter, she described how she had been struggling with her faith, feeling lost in a world that seemed increasingly dominated by technology and disconnected from humanity. But after hearing my story, she had started praying again, asking for guidance and clarity. "Your story gave me hope," she wrote. "It reminded me that even in a world that feels cold and overwhelming, there is light, there is love, and there is a greater purpose. Thank you for sharing it." I held the letter close, tears streaming down my face. This was why I'd been sent back, not to change the world on my own, but to remind others that they had the power to change it together. Each prayer, each act of faith, each step toward kindness and connection was a thread in the fabric of the future. As I looked out at the horizon, I felt a deep sense of peace. The message was out there now, reaching hearts and minds in ways I could never have imagined. The future was still uncertain, still full of challenges, but I knew without a doubt that humanity had the strength to choose the path of light. And I would spend whatever time I had left reminding them of that truth.